Welcome to Fostering Inclusive Organizations During Times of Crisis, Talent Continuity Learning Series. I'm Floss Aggrey, and I am delighted to walk through this series with you today. From a learning objective perspective, what do we plan to cover? What should you expect to glean from this webinar? I think now more than ever, I don't think anybody would disagree that we're in a time of crisis. So, and we'll talk about this more in a second. So, at times like this, inclusivity and environments of inclusion are really it's imperative, right? It's is there are no options. And many of us have been on a journey to build an organization that's both diverse and inclusive for some time, right? We get it. But now more than ever, we are required to step up as leaders and really put our money where our mouth is, so to speak. We really have to be invested in it and show that. And in doing so, it's important for you to think about how do we cultivate that, right? So if we're serious about it, we're investing in it, we are sort of making sure that we understand the benefits. We are translating that down to members of our teams to make sure they understand it. How are we cultivating that? How are we fostering that? How are we growing that and continuing to thrive in it? As a leader, what should we focus on during this time to further drive that? Right. So in talking about the benefits, one of the first benefits, which this is probably not news to anyone, but it's really important to remember. And as we go through the deck, you'll hear me talk about why. But the studies, the data. Gallup has done a study, and it talks about how much money companies actually leave on the table, or this is really a waste issue. So a waste in productivity, right? And this is really important to us culturally at Randstad Sourceright because we're all about efficiency. So billions of dollars in productivity lost because employees don't feel included, right? This is something that is straightforward in terms of solving for. I can't say that it's absolutely easy because it takes time, but it is straightforward in building a solution. We just have to be courageous in doing so and addressing it. Harvard Business Review has a study out there that talks about how, 3 years after employees have been with the organization, how the turnover, attrition. So, there are studies out there that talks about just how much money is lost in attrition each year. I work with several clients on a day-to-day basis as the VP of Diversity and Inclusion. And one of the key things when we talk about building diverse and inclusive programs, they're always interested in my perspective, and I've been doing this for a number of years now on impacting attrition, right? So this is important from an HR perspective, keeping employees present, keeping them engaged. Inclusion is key, significantly higher 3 years after their experience of exclusion, right? Most employees, then 6 months of coming through the door, they feel excluded. So with that, we have to be mindful of it and make sure that our process has steps in place to remedy that. Straightforward solution. In terms of, the remediation, by making sure that they feel included, engaged, there are studies that actually back this up to say that we know that there is loss monetarily, but there are studies that say, when people feel motivated, they're more likely to cooperate or feel engaged. So the PMC National Library of Medicine actually did a study on the origins of belonging. And the scientists found that people cooperated better when they felt actually included and engaged. So it makes sense. Like I said, we just have to really make it a priority in our organization. When we think about evolution as well, it makes sense. Our nervous system is built to detect when we are embraced, when we feel included, or when there's threat, and then we're more likely to come on board and cooperate when we feel that way, right? And it makes sense. If there are two groups and there's one group that if you're a person kind of standing and trying to decide which group you want to partner with, if you feel like the group on the left here is opposing, not really helpful, or not really interested, maybe I should say, in what you have to say fully, and there are a lot of people that may say that they care what you have to say, but you don't necessarily feel that. So you don't feel that coming from that group. The group on the right, you actually feel like, hey, we're curious. We want to know, what do you think? We're sure you have some great ideas to share. Tell us all about it. You're more likely to engage and cooperate fully. Not to say that you won't with the group on the left, but you're more likely with the group on the right that is encouraging and will be appreciative, obviously, of what you have to give and bring. And there's also another study, research Kate shows and proves this, right? So employees that feel like they are accepted, they're 4 times more likely to give it their all, right? And that goes back to the example, the scenario I was just talking about, right? So a group that not really asking, or maybe they are, but it feels like, okay, we're checking the box, versus the group on the right that really is genuinely, and you feel it, and we can feel it. So when we talk about, when I speak about the two groups, right? One, saying that you're included, but it feels like a check the box, or it's guarded, it's not really there, versus the group on the right where you can really feel it, like they want to hear from you, they're ready to soak it up, they come in with curious minds. Those groups, the individuals within that particular group, what are some of the traits that they embody, right? So one being, they are empathic, and with that, sometimes some people are naturally empathic, some people not so much, which is fine. But I personally feel like we can all be empathic. We can all be empathic. We just have to take a moment and focus and prioritize and be present. Being empathic, sometimes truly empathic to the point where it's making a difference or is calling for change, requires you to be courageous. It requires you to also be honest and authentic with yourself and also others, because others see that within you. Requires you to be aware of how you feel. How can I be truly courageous and authentic at my core if at the depth of who I am, I'm not really taking a second to be aware? And it's hard to, I will say, in all honesty, we're all moving really, really quickly. So you have to make a conscious effort to do this. Just the pace of things in the world we live in right now. There's also, if you are self-aware, you're authentic, you're empathic, and you're conscious of your own unique attributes, right? So those individuals within that group that's accepting, they're conscious of their own unique abilities, so they respect diversity in others. You have to respect it in yourself, so they respect it in themselves, and in turn, they value that in those around, truly at their heart. Right, there's an honor and respect for it, and they get it. And so that leads, as leaders, we stand to embody these things here. We encourage those that are a part of our teams, and they feel inspired and engaged, and they want to give us more. So these individuals that I'm talking about, they form the organization, right? They make up what the organization is all about. So when I talk about the core pillars of organizational inclusion, it goes back to the people that make up those organizations, right? And so it's important to know as a leader what's going on within your organization to sort of address or remedy any barriers to inclusion. We talked about 400 to 550 billions of dollars lost in productivity when we don't get this right. So looking at the framework, and you can do this in the form of organization, like surveys, diversity, equality, and inclusion surveys that you send out. I know Randstad Sourceright, I receive them all the time, where they are sending out surveys to see how we feel, and that's everybody in general. I think with that, there's also the process of looking for opportunities at every level in the organization, not looking for a positive score like, oh my God, goodness, oh, that's great. We were shooting for 10 and we got it, we scored 10, no. Or we're shooting for whatever. But look for opportunities to enhance or improve your organization from the space of inclusion. And with that, do something with the opportunities that you uncover. I know that I've in this space, I've worked as a VP of D&I for a while now, and sometimes there's a kind of a interest or want to quickly get to a point of, from an organization perspective, those organizations that are on that D&I journey, to really just get there, and really communicate to candidates that the organization is diverse and inclusive, because companies are now recognizing how essential this is, or how much that makes a difference relative to attraction. I think there 60 some odd percent, there's a study by Glassdoor, I believe, that talks about 60 some odd percent of candidates look at the diversity of the organization and how inclusive it is when considering an offer. So when we think about how quality talent drives the performance and the success of our organization, these are important things to consider from an attraction perspective, making sure that it's these things, diversity and inclusion, is prioritized. It's no longer a nice to have. If we want to retain top talent, attract top talent. And there are studies that also talk about generational diversity and how this impacts generational diversity differently. And this is really important, as we all know, I'm sure, for millennials, who tend to really have to be socially conscious. Speaking of being just socially conscious and aware, when I am a person and candidate, I'm considering coming to work for your organization, what do your core values say? Or even as an employee working there, can I trust that we are focused on truly diversity and inclusion? Is it stated in our core values? And then when we talk about, again, our organization, fourthly, and making sure that it's one that's focused on inclusion, making sure that, and we can't change hearts and minds overnight, but at least as part of your hiring process, asking questions to ensure that they align culture. There's a genuine respect for all, right? So because you may have policies and processes in place, but people, people are people. And sometimes, when they are in different settings and they're not on stage, and if they don't have that true respect for diversity, there are certain things that they may not understand, or certain things that they may say that's not truly appropriate, and they may not even realize that it's not appropriate because of that. Just from an awareness perspective, the lack of genuine, and when I say genuine, at your core, respect for all levels of diversity. So you need people like that working at your company to truly create an environment that's inclusive. And if you do, going back to this group on the left that's just checking the box and the group on the right, when you talk about joining a team or cooperating, when you have that environment where everybody, where there's a genuine respect for diversity, I am in turn feeling empowered to be my whole self. And I am more likely, more likely than not, going to really work hard or strive hard to be as innovative as possible or out of the box as possible, because I'm not necessarily feeling like that my creative ideas are going to be, shut down or dismissed. I feel like they will be received. Any idea that I bring will be considered and received. So when we talk about going further, mentioning fostering inclusivity at this time, we mentioned the benefits earlier, but as leaders of ourselves, leaders of organizations, what are some of the things that we need to continue to ponder on? I think one thing is having a deep understanding of what's important to your employees. What do they expect from you? They expect for us to be flexible. Bottom line, 91%, a study by CDAM found that 91% of employees expect for their leaders, the business, to be flexible. From an engagement perspective, something else I mentioned, the genuine respect for diversity. There's a study that talks about from Science Direct how natural biases, we tend to snap back to our natural biases, and we're all biased at the time of high stress, which we're under right now, right? So I mentioned how if you don't have the genuine respect for diversity, may tend to say things or do things that may not necessarily be considered appropriate. Now more than ever is a time of when things like that pop up, because those natural biases are there and it's harder to push that down because we're over here trying to cope and balance other things, external factors. In terms of our ability to sort of check this, or not just react, think that through, that's our reasoning system, that it is somewhat suppressed at the time of crisis. There's also just the ability right now to, it's hard to really stick to kind of rules and regulations and that sort of thing if you are under high stress, right? Because you're just trying to, your mind is working to make sense of things. ResearchGate has a study out that also talks about that, and how at the time of crisis, we are really all about self-preservation at our core. So, and I'm not saying that we are in that space yet where everybody's just thinking about preserving self, but we've sort of kind of seen that just looking around us and how certain people have responded to the crisis. So just keeping this in mind in terms of how you react. Also being mindful of not only just managing that stress and the default reactions and thinking before we speak to make sure that we are in a space that feels inclusive, but thinking about other barriers that come up. So I mentioned having the conversation with your employees and things of that nature, but also making sure that you understand and you don't misinterpret things relative to how an employee is feeling, or misinterpret. Sometimes employees may not want you to have the answers, or want you to speak in response to if they're having a bad day or they're dealing with stress, right? And we're talking about creating an environment that is inclusive. I think it's important to have a plan in terms of how you approach that, right? So for me, for example, the way that I approach it is I have scheduled 15 minutes each day and made it optional for members of my team to join. And it's a time for us to connect, and it's a time of full transparency, right? But again, it's optional. I work to not misinterpret or infringe upon, their personal space with things going on, but I do want to make sure that my employees feel safe and they know that there's a safe place here. So I think that's important. From a leadership perspective, making sure you also avoid, um, not appreciating your own uniqueness, as I said, or not focusing or being aware of things, what's considered priorities to diverse groups, or not considering that people bring different experiences to the table, and sometimes you may not always understand it. So it's important for us to be mindful of that. Now, we mentioned the stress, right? And how stress impacts leadership and might impact how you respond. This goes a step further when you think about our employees that are ethnically diverse, right? So there is always, I think, for the most part, an instance where, as a diverse employee, meaning a minority in a majority setting, that diverse employees may not always feel a sense of safety in all settings. They may not necessarily always feel included. So diversity and inclusion is really important in most instances to diverse employees because they get it, right? They can empathize, they've been through it, they experience it daily. But with COVID-19 and the rise in awareness around racial disparities, that has brought up or resurfaced a lot of old wounds for a number of people, and in some instances, new wounds or misunderstanding, or people struggling to find a way to respond appropriately. So just as a leader, be mindful of another layer that's present in dealings and conversations. So there's more weight there. And there are studies, specifically, I think it's Corn Ferry, that has a study about being proactive at this in this space. But this instance here, relative to the psychological safety of diverse employees and the stress management piece, is actually a result of research done by ResearchGate. So when we talk about barriers, and I know that we're all aware of this, but during COVID-19, people who are a little bit more isolated, they're also a little bit more vulnerable from a remote work perspective, as most of us are working in, just things that we want to consider, and is just echoing, continuing to talk about the purpose, and this just builds a sense of solidarity. It makes individuals feel included. We want to make sure that individuals feel safe, and with safety, comes a level of trust, that rapport, that cooperation. As you're joining meetings and you're having team calls, ask ask their opinion from a genuine space. And when the opinion is provided, listen and provide feedback, right? Objective feedback. If it's not appropriate to provide feedback during the call, maybe from a time constraint perspective, or you just hated the idea, there are side moments where you can have sidebar conversations to talk through certain things with employees in an appropriate way. But again, just being mindful of some of the additional hurdles that we're facing right now. We talked about earlier just the racial disparities right now, and how I think everyone is impacted to a certain extent, but as a diversity, and I am personally, seeing the impact on people that represent diverse groups, right? And many of them are looking for an opportunity to engage in the conversation. Some not, but some are. So we talked about the courageous conversations earlier. And I think in engaging in those conversations, when we talk about, there's some risk there though. So you want to be careful in terms of approaching conversations. I would say just taking your time, being cautious, um, exercising a high level of emotional intelligence, not rushing in, listening first. I think that's key, really, really key. Just saying less and listening more, right? Because when there is sort of a environment of sort of anxiety or heightened awareness, you don't know, honestly, what word may leave someone feeling a certain way, with the best intentions, right? And this could even be a diverse colleague having another, conversation with someone that's diverse. So just treading lightly there, but not being afraid to have the conversation. And when I say conversation, to listen and engage. Um, I think having appropriate conversations goes back to informing yourself and just making sure that you're educated. So Randstad has a number of business resource groups that gives us the opportunity to engage with, different groups, expand our cultural awareness. There's also just a number of books out there that you can read about race and privilege. White Fragility is one of them, New York Times bestseller. I recommend that you read that. That was helpful for me. As a leader in exercising and inclusivity, what more can we do? So as a leader, we talked about how you shape the organization, you shape the inclusion of the organization. You are a major contributor of that. I'll go a step further in talking about how you represent a joint vision, right? And it's important for you to share that and talk through that with your employees and relative to the organization, and echo what's important for that organization so that they are aligned to that. And making sure that that employee knows that the success of their of the organization will um, be attributed back to them. So they have basically your employees have a big role to play in how your organization reemerges, right? So when we talk about um, innovation, now more than ever is a time where we need innovative ideas. We're working to do things in a better and more efficient way. We're having to do things differently, right? So they're a big part of that success. And I think when we talk about inclusion and belonging, it's so essential for you to let employees know that. Make sure your employees are actually not only just, I want to say, even feel it, like they really know that. Um, Thirdly, being flexible. I mentioned this earlier. If employees are, if there's safety there, they're going to feel safe in being vulnerable. And when I say vulnerable, I mean honest in terms of their feelings. We talked about safety and security. The transparency and honesty is key relative to your communication. Going back to self-awareness, now I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into this. I think just thinking about if you are someone that is, and we all at some level, represent diversity because we're all unique. So we want to, as we are having conversations with our teams, and we're making sure that we're having conversations in an authentic way, we are authentically echoing how significant diversity and inclusion is, right? So making sure that they know that we're saying that in an authentic way because we respect the genuine diverse spaces within ourselves. We have a rhythm of sending out things, letting them know, communicating this, so it doesn't feel like, oh, this person is just, they happen to say this on this day. No, this is a part of who we are. So we're consistently putting things out. Again, from a Randstad Sourceright perspective, I'm a member of the diversity and inclusion team, and we are consistently having, what we call ready chats, Randstad Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion chats. So we're extending these invitations to have these discussions with employees to layer that messaging. Just from a training perspective, when we talk about COVID-19, making sure that employees know that they have support, right? So this is, again, goes back to self-awareness, thinking about if someone feels stressed, recommending that they take part in those things, because you're thinking about how you would feel in that space potentially, right? But I do want to say one key thing we want to be mindful of is really, when we talk about self-awareness, listening and being open and engaging, right? And not necessarily treating individuals. And I thought about this a second ago when I was going into this deeper, but treating that individual how they want to be treated in this space, not necessarily how you would want to be treated, right? Because everyone is unique, everybody's different. And so we have to listen to be aware to actually do that, right? And distinguish and pick up on cues relative to certain blind spots that we have, so that we give ourselves the opportunity to address bias in advance. And that comes with leading from within, remembering your humanity, right? I know for myself, sometimes I have to catch myself because I'm going from meeting to meeting, as I mentioned earlier, very quickly. But it's important to take a step back, be present, be human, remember that, and being honest. That solidarity, making sure that if you are aware of that and remembering that, just like my employee is trying to work and navigate through this crisis, and even though from my perspective, maybe I don't necessarily feel like I have the space to show how it's impacting me, it's important to demonstrate a sense of solidarity when we're in team meetings or you are engaging colleagues. And that's what I try to do. I try to check on, even outside of our daily meetings, check in with them and see how they're doing, send a quick note, just an impromptu phone call, not too much of their time or too much of their day, just a few minutes to do that. And it just requires being agile. It also requires thinking proactively. So thinking ahead, thinking about just things that you have set up if something does happen from a mental health perspective, like how, or what would you do if you notice that an employee on your team is acting in a way that's inconsistent with how they normally act, that's in a manner that's concerning. And also thinking about how, yes, this time is tragic, but again, that sense of shared purpose that creates a vision longer term. Also thinking about just accessibility for individuals, being neutral in our communication. I talked about the good listening skills. Also thinking about where, if, and it may be a matter of just talking to your team and say, hey, if you don't feel comfortable talking to me, of course we have the EAP program, there's always HR as well. So if they want to voice concerns about bias or prejudice behavior that they're experiencing or witnessing, they can actually do that. We've instituted, that's something Randstad Sourceright has done as well, is send out communications that talk about what they should do, what employees should do if they witness or experience something. Ernst & Young has a study out, and I mentioned earlier about treating individuals how they want to be treated, and that talked about how exclusion, a lack of engagement, impacts different generations differently. So I just want to call out here again, just to be mindful that Generation Xers may feel a certain way if we're in meetings and we don't appear to maybe we haven't asked them how they feel about a particular topic or subject or their opinion or their ideas, or we aren't looking for their ideas, or we aren't giving them the autonomy to do something, just thinking about how that impacts them. And in this, it shows out of all groups, when we talk about being excluded and how that leads to feelings of being ignored, it impacts baby boomers in the biggest way relative to that. So something to think about, the baby boomer generation, and in terms of how you may respond or react differently, just being aware of the diversity that exists there. I mentioned earlier the importance of safety and employees feeling safety to be present and be their whole selves. So during this time of crisis, what can we do as leaders to help? We may not be able to, of course, solve for this completely, but there are things that we can do to mitigate it, right? So we can increase the credibility that's there, so we can talk about what the statistics say. So it's less fear and more, we're leaning more on facts. Also, making sure that we are reliable and consistent in how we show up. I think that's key, and that's something that even myself personally, I work to do in all of my meetings, and just be mindful and prepared as I'm showing up. Making sure that people are reflected as a priority. They can see that we actually put people first. So we're focused on their safety and security. Even as we return to work, we understand, yes, we understand the need to, from a business perspective, but we're also prioritizing the health, safety, and welfare of our employees. And then we're also, in the midst of that, we are representing a state of confidence and calmness, again, to instill a sense of safety and trust. So as we come to a close with our presentation today, I would really like to just go back through what we talked about to sort of layer this in. One being the benefits, right? We talked about billions of dollars in losses when employees are less than productive because they don't feel engaged. We talked about fostering inclusivity during time of crisis, and how employees are more likely to cooperate 4 times as much in some instances when they feel included and like they belong and like we're genuinely interested in what they have to bring. Inclusive leadership. What does that look like? Well, being courageous, having conversations, listening first, expanding our cultural awareness, making sure that we're informed, and we're also exercising boundaries. So with that, a lot of ideas and examples, but what have you taken away that you can do personally to foster inclusivity at your organization right now at this moment? I've jotted down a couple of steps here, just relative to what I personally believe, but I encourage you to think about this for yourself. I think diversity allyship is important. Um, your voice is needed. Speak up if you notice something, and inequality or bias in action, right? I think it has a domino effect. I mentioned earlier how organizational inclusion, it starts with me. It starts with you as the individual. It starts with a genuine respect for diversity. So if someone notices someone not displaying that, what they're doing is giving the organization an opportunity to make this person aware of something maybe that they, weren't aware. And this could go back to just their space or their surroundings, or just unaware. And there's a number of reasons that people could just be unaware accidentally because they haven't invested the time to expand their personal awareness. And that's why I'm in yourself, because it is an investment. It is an investment from a time perspective. It's an investment even from an energy perspective, because it requires us to be flexible and moving ourselves in a different direction, seeing ourselves differently, right? So when you see others differently, you begin to see yourself differently. And as that comes up and comes about, allowing that change to take place, right? Don't get to a place where we're actually fighting it because we want so hard to stand true to certain long-standing belief systems. So just valuing different perspectives and different people. So I want to close again by thanking you so much for joining me on this as we talk through this webinar, and I would love to stay connected with you. In the meantime, to learn more about how Randstad Sourceright is helping clients achieve their diversity and inclusion goals, I encourage you to visit www.randstadusa.com/about/diversity. We again work with clients on a day-to-day basis, helping them build diversity and inclusion solutions. And I look forward to partnering with you. I can also be reached at floss.aggrey@randstadsourceright.com. Thank you. Stay inclusive.